السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. All thanks and praise are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and may His peace and blessings be upon His last and final messenger, His family, His companions, and those who follow them until the end of times. So alhamdulillah, it's actually an honor and privilege to be back. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to bless all of you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to bless our community. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow our community to actually grow and prosper as well. And as I've said before, this is probably one of the most enjoyable things that I do for my own personal benefit. And the hope is that by all of us coming together and being together in the masjid and learning about the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, learning about the Quran, learning about its meanings, we can all be counted amongst the best of people. And this is that hadith that we've discussed multiple times, where the Prophet ﷺ told us, خَيْرُكُمْ مَنْ تَعَلَّمَ الْقُرْآنَ وَعَلَّمَ, that the best people amongst you are those who learn the Quran and teach it. So part of learning the Quran, part of teaching the Quran is understanding its meanings. It's going through the Tafseer, understanding the lessons, the morals, and the guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us through these divine, eternal, beautiful words. So inshallah, all of us can be from amongst those best of people. We can be considered from amongst the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ahlul Quran, Ahlullah wa khasatu. The people of the Quran, those who study it, who engage with it, who act upon it, they are the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're counted amongst His special servants. So inshallah, all of us can be counted amongst them as well. So we've been discussing so far Suratul Anbiya, the story of the prophets. And as we can see so far, the reason why it's called the stories of the prophets, or the surah of the prophets, is because it discusses and mentions the stories of a number of different prophets that have come throughout history. So last time we met, we discussed two verses. We talked about verse number 76 and verse number 77. And these verses, they briefly alluded to the story of Nuh alayhi salam. So in these verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He reminded us first and foremost that his dua, his prayer was accepted. And secondly, he was saved from his evil nation. And thirdly, that his nation was completely destroyed. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us, وَنُوحًا إِذْ نَادَى مِنْ قَبْلِ فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ فَنَجَّيْنَاهُ وَأَهْلَهُ مِنَ الْكَرْبِ الْعَظِيمِ. And remember Nuh, when he called upon Allah before that time. So we responded to him and saved him and his family from the great flood, from the great difficulty. وَنَصَرْنَاهُ مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا قَوْمَ سَوْءٍ فَأَغْرَقْنَاهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. And we saved him from the people who denied our signs. Indeed, they were a people of evil, so we drowned all of them together. Now the main moral, the main lesson of that particular story is patience. It is steadfastness. To patiently persevere, to remain steadfast and strong in the face of difficulties and hardships. So it's supposed to be a morally uplifting story. It's supposed to give us this courage, this strength, this patience, this perseverance, this steadfastness to continue moving along, to continue spreading the message of Islam, to remain steadfast, especially in the face of difficulties. And most importantly, to always have hope in the mercy and help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That no matter how bad the situation seems, no matter how difficult times are, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so vast that it always prevails. The help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always comes for the believers. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is literally telling us that draw strength from the example of Nuh alayhi salam, who continued to invite his people for 950 years. Without any hiccups, without any stops, without any hesitation, despite the fact that only a few people accepted his message. So we talked about some of the commentators who mentioned that perhaps 10 people accepted his message. Maybe 40 people accepted his message out of a period of 950 years. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that look at his example, follow his example, and follow in his footsteps. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Elsewhere in the Quran, after mentioning the story, He says, فَاصْبِرْ إِنَّ الْعَاقِبَةَ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Be patient, because indeed the best ending is for the people of God consciousness. The best ending is always for the people of taqwa. And that best ending comes both in this world, but most importantly, it comes in the akhirah. It comes in the hereafter in the form of eternal happiness and eternal bliss. Alright, and as we've discussed before, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's mentioning these particular stories in order to console the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in response to the difficulties he faced, and especially in response to the harm he was facing at the hands of the Quraysh. So the Meccan period of life, it was very difficult, it was very hard for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were persecuted, they were tortured, they were ridiculed, they were made fun of, they were mocked, and there was all this negativity. So these verses and these stories, they're providing comfort to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the same thing goes for us. They're supposed to provide comfort and peace and strength for us as well. Alright, now in this next set of verses, the next maybe 4 or 5 verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala briefly mentions the story of Dawood and Sulaiman alayhimus salam. And this is the 5th story that's being mentioned in the surah. So a brief review. What was the first story mentioned? Who remembers? The first story mentioned in Surah Al-Anbiya was the story of Musa alayhi salam. Very briefly. It was just a little reference to it, maybe 1 or 2 verses. After that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam in quite some detail. Then after that, Allah mentioned the story of Lut alayhi salam. Then after that, Nuh. And now this is the 5th story, that of Dawood and Sulaiman alayhimus salam. Alright, now just like in the previous story, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentioned some of the great favors and blessings He had given to both of them. So first, He starts off by mentioning a blessing that was common between them. This was a blessing that was shared by both of them. And that's the blessing of knowledge and wisdom. So by indicating that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's showing us how significant knowledge and wisdom are. That these are actually divine gifts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Having knowledge, being knowledgeable, and more importantly, having an understanding of that knowledge is a sign of the favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is something that the Prophet ﷺ told us in a hadith as well. مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. That when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants good for a person, He grants that person a deep understanding, a deep insight into religion. So part of the favors, part of the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon us as human beings is this gift of knowledge. And that's why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam throughout his life emphasized the importance of seeking knowledge. That seeking knowledge is an obligation. The first verses to be revealed were Iqra, read, recite, learn, seek this knowledge. So knowledge always plays a central and significant role in our lives. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions blessings that were unique to both of them. So first Allah mentions that the birds in the mountains, they would join Dawood alayhi salam as he praised and glorified Allah. So Dawood alayhi salam was given this extremely beautiful voice. And when he would recite his scripture, literally the entire creation would join him in glorifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as he's walking and he's reciting these verses, the birds would join in. And then the mountains, these inanimate objects, will join in as well. So this is something that's extraordinary. It's not something that's natural. This was a miraculous act at the hands of Dawood alayhi salam. And he was also given this unique gift of making armor with his own hands. Alright, so Dawood alayhi salam, he was a king. And part of being a king is that he had an army. And this army was involved in various battles. So one of the things that was difficult was the armor that they had during that time. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it that he was able to mold and shape iron with his own hands. Again, another miracle. So these are 2 specific gifts that we are being reminded that were given to Dawood alayhi salam. And then as for Sulaiman alayhi salam, he was given gifts by Allah that we would think of as magical. Right? Literally when you read about the story of Sulaiman alayhi salam, you think he was some like magical figure. In a good way, not in a negative way. So for example, the air, the wind was made subservient to him along with jinns and along with Satans, and we'll discuss that a little bit later on. Now here in this particular verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's making a brief reference to one episode from their story. And we won't get into the details of their entire lives. We'll just focus on this one particular episode. So Dawood alayhi salam, not only was he a prophet, but he was also a fair and just king. And he was a just and righteous ruler who said to brought peace and prosperity to his people. So he wasn't just an average king, he wasn't an average ruler, he was also a prophet. And because he was a prophet, he was someone who was extremely just, he was extremely righteous, and he brought happiness, he brought security, he brought prosperity to his people. And the narrations mention that Dawood alayhi salam, he had divided his day into 4 separate parts. So one part of the day was dedicated to earning a living. And that in and of itself is something that is unique, because he's a king, he's a ruler, he doesn't really need to work. But despite that, he had dedicated a portion of the day to earning his own livelihood. The second portion was specifically for worship, to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third portion of the day was to listen to the complaints of his people. And the last portion was again to give sermons and to preach and to invite people towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alright, so now the story goes is that one day while he was sitting and he was listening to people's disputes, he was listening to people's issues and problems, 2 individuals came to him with a particular dispute. Now one of these individuals was a farmer. He had a farm, he had some type of crops, he had a piece of land in which he grew certain things. And the other individual was a shepherd who had a flock of goats or a flock of sheep. So the farmer said, "O Prophet, this man's sheep entered my field last night and it ate all of my crops. So I have come to you to ask for some type of compensation, that judge fairly between us." So Dawood alayhi salam, he turns towards the shepherd, he asks him, "Is this true?" So the shepherd said, "Yes, unfortunately during the night I lost track and my flock of sheep went and they ate his entire crop." So Dawood alayhi salam, based upon the rules of justice and fairness, he ruled that the sheep should be given to the farmer. So the commentators, they mention that basically what happened is that Dawood alayhi salam, he assigned a value to the crops. And he determined that the value of the crops was equivalent to the value of the sheep. So in order to be fair, he told the shepherd that give your sheep to the farmer and your case is settled. So they accepted the judgment, but as they were leaving, they ran into Sulaiman alayhi salam. So Sulaiman asked him that what was the issue and what did my father say? And at this moment in time, they say Sulaiman alayhi salam, he was only 11 years old. So he was a very young child, he was a young boy. So they told him the case, they told him the decision of Dawood alayhi salam. So he replied, "If it was my choice, if it was my decision, I would have ruled differently. I would have ruled by saying that the shepherd should give you the flock or herd of sheep. And you can benefit from their wool, you can benefit from their milk. And then give the field to the shepherd and allow him to cultivate it. Allow him to cause those crops to grow once again. And once the crops regrow, then each person should be given their property back." So basically, he kind of made a compromise between the two. Right? His ruling, his judgment, his understanding was to create a compromise between both parties and to be more fair and more considerate for both of their rights. So Sulaiman alayhi salam, he actually goes to his father Dawood and he says that, "Oh my father, I believe you made a mistake. And the proper ruling, the proper judgment should be like this." So after hearing this, Dawood alayhi salam was actually extremely happy. And he told him that this is what sound judgment is. And all praise belongs to Allah for gifting you with wisdom. You are truly Sulaiman the wise. And then he approved of this ruling. He called back the 2 men and he changed his original verdict. And this is the episode that's being mentioned in these 2 verses. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَدَاوُودَ وَسُلَيْمَانَ إِذْ يَحْكُمَانِ فِي الْحَرْثِ إِذْ نَفَشَتْ فِيهِ غَنَمُ الْقَوْمِ وَكُنَّا لِحُكْمِهِمْ شَاهِدِينَ فَفَهَّمْنَاهَا سُلَيْمَانَ وَكُلًّا آتَيْنَا حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا. And mention Dawood and Sulaiman when they judged concerning the field, when the sheep of a people overran it at night, and we were witness to their judgment. And we gave understanding of the case to Sulaiman, and to each of them we gave judgment and knowledge. Alright, now first and foremost, this verse is being addressed specifically to the Prophet ﷺ. So when it says وَدَاوُودَ وَسُلَيْمَانَ, there's a word that's understood before it. Right? The commentators of the Quran mention that the command udhkur is understood to be before this portion of the verse. So it's وَذْكُرْ دَاوُودَ وَسُلَيْمَانَ, that remember or mention the story of Dawood and Sulaiman. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's addressing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam directly, and He's telling him that remember this story, or mention this story, O Messenger, to your people. Remember and remind others of the story of Dawood and Sulaiman alayhimus salam, when they both passed judgment regarding the field that was destroyed by another person's sheep. إِذْ يَحْكُمَانِ, when they both passed judgment fil harth, regarding the field. إِذْ نَفَشَتْ فِيهِ غَنَمُ الْقَوْمِ, when the sheep of a particular people came and literally destroyed it. وَكُنَّا لِحُكْمِهِمْ شَاهِدِينَ, and we were witnesses to their judgment. Alright, now Dawood alayhi salam, again, he initially ruled according to the letter of the law. His judgment compensated the farmer for the damage done to his property, which established justice. So Dawood alayhi salam, he was understanding and looking at the case through the lens and perspective of absolute justice, of what fair compensation would be. And Sulaiman alayhi salam, he ruled according to the principles of a compromise, something that was considered to both parties grievances. So both of them judged according to their own discretion and understanding. Right? So none of them was actually right or wrong. Both Dawood and Sulaiman alayhi salam, father and son, they were correct in their respective judgments and their respective rulings, but they were looking at it from two different angles, from two different perspectives. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say that Dawood alayhi salam was mistaken or he was wrong. Rather, He just says, فَفَهَّمْنَاهَا Sulaiman. And we inspired Sulaiman to give the judgment that was fairer. So we gave understanding of the case to Sulaiman, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Sulaiman alayhi salam greater insight and wisdom into the case. He gave him a deeper level of understanding and inspired him to give a judgment that was more considerate to both parties. And this judgment allowed both parties to benefit without causing any type of harm or loss to either of them. So again, it's important to note that again, Dawood alayhi salam's judgment was not wrong. It was also correct according to the rules of law and justice, and there was nothing wrong with his ruling. And that's one of the reasons why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, وَكُلًّا آتَيْنَا حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا. We gave both of them hukm, ruling, judgment, the ability to have insight into cases, وَعِلْمًا, and knowledge. So meaning both Dawood and Sulaiman alayhi salam were given the gifts of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. So one of the great mufassirun from the time period of the successors, right? So we have the generation of the Sahaba, the generation of the companions radiallahu anhum, and then we have their students, which are known as at-tabi'un, the successors. So amongst them there was a very famous commentator of the Quran by the name of Mujahid rahimahullah. And he was one of the students of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma. Now Ibn Abbas, he was considered to be the most knowledgeable companion when it came to understanding the Quran. So out of all of the companions, he was gifted with a special insight into the meanings and understandings of the Quran. So he had a group of students that learned the Tafseer from him. And one of them was Mujahid rahimahullah. So he mentions both of these rulings were correct in their own respective right. The ruling passed by Dawood alayhi salam was strictly legal, whereas the ruling passed by Sulaiman alayhi salam was a compromise. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elsewhere in the Quran says, وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ. And compromise is always better. Right? Compromise is always better. And that's why the second judgment was praised by Allah by saying, فَفَهَّمْنَاهَا Sulaiman. And we made Sulaiman alayhi salam understand the proper insight into this case. Alright. So now that brings us to the end of the discussion of what the verses are actually saying. Now a lot of commentators at this point, they take a lot of time to detail and explain differences of opinion. Right? They actually take this opportunity and the lessons learned from this particular incident or this particular story to discuss the concept of ikhtilaf. Right? To discuss the concept of differences of opinion that exist amongst or within Islam. Alright, now since this is a very important topic and something which is often misunderstood, I also think it's very beneficial to spend a little bit of time talking about it as well. Alright, now all of us are aware of the fact that within Islam, within our Sharia, there are issues that are disagreed upon. There are multiple issues that the great scholars of Islam, the Imams of our Ummah, they had valid legal differences of opinion regarding them. But a very common question that's asked is that if every single scholar, if every single mujtahid in Imam, they're all looking at the same sources. Every single one of them is turning back to the Quran and Sunnah. They're getting their guidance from the Quran and Sunnah. Then why in the world do they disagree on so many things? Right? That's a common question that everybody has. If everyone's referring to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then why are there so many disagreements? So in other words, if all the schools of thought are using the same sources, the Quran and Sunnah, then why do differences of opinion exist? Right? Isn't Islam one? Isn't the Quran one? Wasn't the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam one individual? So there should not be any differences of opinion. Right? Now understanding when it's acceptable to have differences of opinion and the reasons behind them is extremely important. It is extremely significant because it provides a lot of clarity and it clears up a lot of misconceptions and understandings. Right? There's a lot of obscurity, there's a lot of, I guess you can say, misunderstandings or misrepresentations when it comes to these particular issues. Alright. The reason, or a lot of times they disagreed having established certain principles and formulating certain precepts. So they agreed upon everything that they could agree upon, and they only disagreed when it was unavoidable. And the reason why they disagreed is because of how they understood the evidence in front of them. So again, every single scholar, they're going back to the Quran and Sunnah. But the way they understand it is different. Every single individual approaches the Quran, approaches the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a different way. And they look at the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they understand them in different ways as well. So a lot of these differences go back to how they are understood. So they say the major reason is their difference in understanding the text of the Quran and hadith and their approaches to them. Now the plurality of opinions that exist within Islam and within the Sharia, these are a benefit and blessing for the community and not a nuisance. So oftentimes people think that having differences of opinion is something that's negative. It's something that's bad. But in reality, the scholars historically have always said that this is actually a blessing. This is a mercy for the ummah. And there's a very rich tradition of diversity and disagreement within Islamic law that has always been tolerated and accepted. So historically, from the time of the companions until today, these differences of opinion have always been accepted and tolerated. They have always been something that's understood to be valid. But the caveat is that as long as the disagreement is valid. And we'll get to that discussion shortly. Alright, so the differences of opinion is something that is valid and allowed within the scope of the Sharia. And the diversity of opinions that exist within Islamic jurisprudence is something that's an accepted reality and something that is actually celebrated. So for example, there's this very famous statement from Imam Suyuti rahimahullah. Now Imam Suyuti himself was a giant. He literally wrote works, or he composed works in every single field of Islamic studies. So he has a book on Tafseer, he has a book on Usul al-Tafsir, he has a book on Hadith and Usul al-Hadith and I guess you can say the biographies of Hadith narrators and anything else you can think of, he's written on it. So he's a very prolific writer, he was a very well-respected scholar. So he mentions that اعلم أن اختلاف المذاهب في هذه الملة نعمة كبيرة وفضيلة عظيمة. That know without a doubt, the differences of the schools of thought in Islam are a big blessing and a great grace. It has a delicate, fine secret that is understood by those who know, but the ignorant are blind to it. So again, as I've said, all of us are aware that there are certain issues within fiqh that are disagreed upon. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of issues. And these issues, they're classified as being mujtahid fi. Right? Any disagreement that exists, these issues are classified as being mujtahid or mujtahid fi. Meaning, they're open to interpretation. Right? Essentially, that's what it means. That if there's a disagreement that exists, that means that the matter is open to disagreement. Now, the reason where this comes from is when we look at legal evidence from the Quran and Sunnah. There are 4 different categories of proofs. There are 4 different categories of evidence. So the first one, it's known as qat'i, right? Ad-dalil al-qat'i, which you can say is absolute proof or definitive proof. So a dalil qat'i is something whose authenticity is 100% absolute. There's no doubt whatsoever regarding its authenticity, and on top of that, it's not open to interpretation. There's not 2 ways of understanding it. It's absolutely clear. So any verse from the Quran, it's known as ad-dalil al-qat'i. Right? The first reason why is because it's absolutely authentic. Every single verse from the Quran is what? It's a verse from the Quran. And there are verses in the Quran that they're not open to interpretation. So for example, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَقِيمُ الصَّلَاةِ, establish prayer. Right? That verse, it's قَطْعِيُّ الثُّبُوت and it's قَطْعِيُّ الدَّلَالَةِ. It doesn't have multiple meanings. Someone can't come and say that, you know what? I think prayer means just sitting down and meditating. Right? You can't come and say that. It's impossible. Prayer means prayer, that specific act that we know. So there are those dalils, there are those proofs that are, again, qat'i, they are definitive. So any ruling of Islam that comes from a definitive proof is not open to interpretation. So there can't be a difference of opinion on the obligation of prayer. Right? There can't be a difference of opinion on the obligation of fasting, or on the obligation of zakat, or even on the obligation of hijab, or the prohibition of riba. These things are not open to interpretation whatsoever. There's no 2 opinions regarding it. Now the second class of evidence is known as ad-dalil al-dhanni, speculative proof. Now a speculative proof has multiple shades, multiple forms. One of them is that it can be 100% authentic, but it's open to interpretation. There's different ways of understanding it, different ways of looking at it. So sometimes a verse of the Quran, obviously it's 100% authentic, but it's open to interpretation. There's different ways of understanding it, there's different ways of analyzing it and looking at it. The vast majority of ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, they are dhanniyu thubut. They're speculative in their authenticity. Right? They're speculative in authenticity, but their meaning may be definitive. But that still makes something a dalil dhanni. So basically, I guess you can say an easy way to understand this is that if something isn't proven by a definitive proof, it's open to interpretation. Right? That's the simple way of putting it. If something in Islam is not established from a definitive proof, it's open to interpretation. And obviously, if something is open to interpretation, what's going to happen? Different opinions are going to exist. That's natural. That's the natural flow. If something is open to interpretation, differences of opinion will exist. So these differences of opinion are valid as long as they are based on sound understanding. They follow established rules of Arabic language and principles of fiqh. So for example, according to the Shafi'is, when a person starts their prayer, they're supposed to raise their hands till where? Till their shoulders. But the Hanafis say that no, when you start prayer, you raise your hands up till your ears. Right? Now both of these are valid opinions, and they exist because there's a hadith about both of them. So the job of the scholar was they came and they look at the entire corpus of hadith, and they found one hadith that says raise your hands till your shoulders. They found another hadith that says raise your hand till your ears. Now what is they supposed to do? Right? What are you supposed to do? Which hadith are you supposed to act upon? Either or. But what the scholars did is they established their own principles of which one to give preference to. Right? How to give preference to these 2 hadith. So one school of thought gives preference to one, and the other one gives preference to the other. And they're all based upon sound understanding and valid, I guess you could say, interpretations. Right? There's differences regarding how we're supposed to hold our hands in prayer. Some people say you hold it on your chest, others say at your navel, some say below your navel. All of these are valid differences of opinion. Right? Some people say that prayer is not valid without Suratul Fatiha. Right? Even for the musalli, the one praying behind the imam. But the Hanafis say that if you're praying behind the imam, you're not supposed to recite anything. Again, all of these are based upon differences in understanding and different approaches. And I'll talk about one issue specifically just to show us how detailed the discussion gets. So issues of Islamic jurisprudence that are disagreed upon, these mujtahid fi masail, right? These disagreed upon issues, they're never as black as white as people make them out to be. Right? Oftentimes when we discuss differences of opinion, we have a very low level of discussion where someone says this is right and you're wrong. But it's never the case where the discussion is that simple. It's always nuanced. There's always detail to it. As a matter of fact, these issues, they're very complex. And they require the expertise of scholars to comb through the Quran and Sunnah, search for relevant texts, then use the rules of Arabic language, principles of fiqh, and their understanding to extrapolate and derive rulings. In addition to that, they will look at the conclusions of previous scholars and experts and understand their arguments and reasoning for those particular conclusions. So it's possible that two scholars will have the same verse in front of them, but because of their different principles and methodologies, they will arrive at two opposite conclusions. Alright, now just to give an example of that, in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَالْمُطَلَّقَاتُ يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ ثَلَاثَةَ قُرُوءٍ. That divorced women, they should wait for a period of 3 cycles. Right? So the word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses for cycle is the word quru. And in Arabic, the word quru, it's the plural of the word qur. And the word qur in the Arabic language, it's a homonym. Right? A homonym is a word that has 2 opposite meanings. A homonym is a word that has 2 opposite meanings. So in the Arabic language, the word qur, it can mean purity or it can mean impurity. It has both of these meanings. So now in this verse, which meaning should be understood? Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying that the divorced woman, their waiting period is 3 cycles of impurity? Or is it 3 cycles of purity? Which one? Right? So the Hanafis, according to the Hanafi school of thought, they say that the word qur here means a period of impurity. So the waiting period of a divorced woman is 3 cycles, right? 3 menstrual cycles. And the reason why they do this, it's based off of some secondary ahadith, but most importantly, the language of the Quran. So they say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ ثَلَاثَةَ قُرُوءٍ. 3 cycles. So they come and they say the word 3 is specific. It can't mean more than 3, it can't mean less than 3. So they're saying the only way to act upon the number 3 is if we understand the word qur to mean a menstrual cycle. So once the woman is divorced, right, the sunnah method is that if someone, Allah not have it happen, but if someone divorces their wife, the sunnah way that the Prophet ﷺ taught us is that you're supposed to give the divorce in a cycle of purity, right, when she's on her tuhr. And after that takes place, then she waits for her 3 cycles to end, right? And once those 3 cycles are done, then the marriage is over. According to the Shafi'is, they say that no, the word qur here means purity. So it's 3 cycles of purity. So what happens is that when the husband gives the divorce in purity, that one doesn't count. So they have to wait longer or shorter? Longer. They have to wait 3 cycles of purity. So the reason why the Hanafi say that can't be the case is because now it's not 3, it's more than 3. Right? So this discussion, it's a very nuanced, a very technical, a very detailed discussion that has to do with language and understanding how language is applied and understanding how to extrapolate meanings and looking at secondary evidences, looking at the opinions of previous scholars to understand these 2 things. So both scholars, they're looking at the exact same verse, but they've come to 2 opposite conclusions. And that's the case for many issues within Islamic law. That's the case for many issues within Islamic jurisprudence. Now I can't come and say that what Imam Shafi'i is wrong. Right? No one can come and say that Imam Abu Hanifa is wrong. They're both right. Right? So these issues of valid differences of opinion, they are things that exist, and they're not things that are supposed to be not tolerated. They are always, or at least for the most part, they are valid. So basically, fiqh is something that is more complex and nuanced than we think. It's never black and white. Someone just can't say that, oh brother, I saw the hadith and this is the ruling. That's never the case. Right? You might have looked at one hadith, but when a scholar makes his judgment, he's looking at what? All the hadith, all the relevant verses. Right? So oftentimes people will come up and be like, oh brother, the hadith is in Bukhari, that's it. That's not the only hadith that exists. There's a whole chapter of ahadith regarding that subject matter. There's relevant verses, there's opinions of the companions radiallahu anhum. All of these things are given consideration when extrapolating a ruling or a judgment. So I guess the upshot of this discussion is fiqh is complex. Fiqh is nuanced. It's very technical, it's a legal discussion, and it should be left for those people who are trained in those legal discussions, who have the understanding of those things. Alright, now one of the important things when it comes to these issues of differences of opinion is something known as adabul ikhtilaf. Right, adabul ikhtilaf, the manners or ethics of disagreement. That we as Muslims, how are we supposed to approach these issues? How are we supposed to deal with them? How should we interact with others who may disagree with us? And this is a very, very important subject matter that unfortunately, especially in our communities, is lacking. Right? Our adabul ikhtilaf, or the amount of tolerance we have for differences of opinion, is something that is lacking. So this is a subject that should be studied by all students of knowledge, scholars, imams, basically every single Muslim. Now first and foremost, again, these issues, especially the detailed fiqhi issues, they should be discussed by those who have the proper qualifications to do so. And as we all know, in about 1.5 months or a little bit more than that, what's going to start? The month of Ramadan. And every single year at the beginning of the month, the community gets involved in moon fighting. Everyone starts discussing the issue of moon sighting. So mashallah, every single person all of a sudden becomes an expert in the issue of moon sighting. And every single person, whoever it is, has their own personal opinion regarding the subject matter. So leave the discussion to those who are experts in it, who are qualified to do so. Right? Just leave the discussion for those who are qualified to do so. Alright, secondly, these issues should be dealt with a great level of tolerance and understanding. So again, even the issue of moon sighting is something that's mujtahid fi. It is an issue that's open to interpretation. And that's why so many different opinions exist. Right? The reason why those opinions exist is because the dalil for moon sighting is not what? It's not qat'i. It's not an absolute definitive proof. It's open to interpretation. That's why even classically you had people who said local sighting and some who said global sighting. That's why that difference of opinion exists, because it's open to interpretation. Now just because someone follows a different opinion than ours doesn't automatically make them wrong. Just because someone follows a different opinion than ours doesn't automatically make them wrong. It doesn't make them lenient. It doesn't make them somehow a person who's deviant and mashallah they're destroying Islam. And unfortunately that's the kind of rhetoric we hear. Right? If someone is following a different opinion, all of a sudden that person's what? He's a kafir, he's a fasiq, he's destroying Islam, he's lenient, he's this, he's that. You hear all different types of nasty things. So no one should be rebuked, reprimanded, scolded, corrected, advised, or yelled at for following a valid difference of opinion. So there's a very, very beautiful saying that's developed by the Shawafi'. They say that issues of ijtihad are not rejected with force. And it is not allowed for anyone to force people to follow their opinion regarding them. It is not allowed for anyone to force people to follow their opinion regarding them. Rather, they should discuss them using scholarly proofs. If one opinion appears correct to a person, he should follow it. And whoever follows the opposite opinion, then there's no blame upon them. So that's literally the attitude we should adopt. That if we think something is correct, alhamdulillah, we stick to it, we follow it. But if someone else thinks something else is correct, then inshallah you let them follow it. It's okay, it's not a big deal. So regarding issues of disagreement, the approach and attitude of the scholars of the past was always the following. And this was always the approach. They would say that our opinion is correct with the possibility of being wrong. And the opposite opinion is wrong, but it has the possibility of being correct. So that was always the attitude, that was always the approach, classically and historically, that the scholars adopted when dealing with differences of opinion. So the mujtahid may be right, and at the same time they may be wrong. And the companions of the Prophet ﷺ and the scholars of the past had differences, but they dealt with them with affection, love, humility, and most importantly, respect. So although they disagreed, they still had respect for the other person and their opinion. And our tradition, it's full of examples of love and respect the scholars showed for each other despite their differences. So for example, once Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah and a scholar by the name of Abu Musa Yunus ibn Abdul A'la, they had a disagreement. They had a debate. So afterwards, this individual says, I haven't seen anyone more intelligent than Imam Shafi'i. One day I debated him regarding some issue and we went our separate ways. Later he met me, he took me by my hand and said, Oh Abu Musa, isn't it that we can still be brothers even though we don't agree upon that issue? Right? That's Imam Shafi'i, mashallah, who till this day, whose name is remembered. He's one of the founders of the four major schools of thoughts. He himself with that humility is going to someone else and saying what? We may disagree, but at the end of the day, we're still brothers, right? There's nothing that can come in between our bond of faith, our bond of iman. Right? Similarly, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he praised Ishaq ibn Rahawayh, who was Imam Abu Hanifa's teacher. So Ishaq ibn Rahawayh, he was one of the famous scholars of Baghdad. He was Imam Abu Hanifa's teacher. And Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal says, no one like Ishaq has crossed the bridge to Khurasan, even though he disagrees with us in many things. Right? Meaning he's literally praising him. That despite the fact that I have so many disagreements with him in issues of fiqh, no one like him has ever come across the bridge of Khurasan. Meaning he's an extremely knowledgeable person. And people will continue disagreeing with one another. That's the reality. People will continue to disagree. And one last example is that of Imam Malik rahimahullah. So once the Khalifa Harun al-Rashid told Imam Malik that he wanted to make copies of his Muwatta. Right? His Muwatta was his famous collection of hadith, which was not only a collection of hadith, but it was also his book of fiqh. Right? The foundation of his madhab is found in his Muwatta. And he said, I want to make copies and distribute it across the Muslim world and make people follow it. So the Khalifa is basically saying, I want to make your book the official book of the entire Islamic world, the entire Muslim world. But Imam Malik rahimahullah, he responded and said, O leader of the faithful, indeed the differences of the scholars is a mercy from Allah on this nation. Everyone follows what is correct according to them. They're all upon guidance and they're all sincere to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And that's the essence of what I'm trying to say. That every single scholar that has a difference of opinion, or all these differences of opinion that exist, each of them respectively is what? Is correct. Each of them respectively is correct. They're all upon guidance, and they're all doing it sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, mashallah, the Muslim community we have in America is very, very diverse. And it's actually something that's very unique. This diversity that we have here, it doesn't exist elsewhere in the world. So if you go to our home countries, if you go to Pakistan, if you go to the masjid, everyone in the masjid is going to be what? Pakistani. Right? If I go to Egypt, everyone in the masjid is going to be Egyptian and Shafi'i. If I go to Saudi, everyone, mashallah, they're Saudi and they're all Hanbalis. In America, we're very unique that the masjid is full of diversity. You have Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Egyptians, Syrians, Palestinians, Muslims from every single corner of the world praying together. So oftentimes we come into contact and we interact with all of these differences of opinion. So each of us, we learn Islam in our own way. We learn Islam from our own traditions and our own understandings, and all of us will have these differences of opinion. And even children who are born and brought up here, they probably follow different opinions than their own parents. And that's something that's going to happen, and that's something that is natural. So this is completely fine and should never be made into an issue. As a matter of fact, when it comes to these types of issues, we're supposed to let people practice what they've learned. Right? Whatever we have learned according to the understanding of our teachers, that's perfectly fine. We let people practice what they have learned as long as it's a valid opinion. And again, that's the caveat. As long as it's valid. Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah, one of the great tabi'un, he says, if you see someone doing something that's disagreed upon and you have another opinion, don't stop him. So, mashallah, if you see someone wiping over their socks while making wudu, don't tell them what you're doing is wrong. They're following another valid opinion, it's okay. MashaAllah, if someone is starting Ramadan with the global announcement and someone's starting it with the local announcement, it's okay. Don't make a big deal out of it. Everyone is correct, inshaAllah. Alright, so this diversity of opinions, it should not lead to disunity. Alright, and that's that's the main crux, that this difference of opinion that exists within the Muslim community, it should not lead to disunity. That unity and conformity are two separate things. Islam requires unity, it does not require conformity. Alright. Alhamdulillah, this is seen in most major masajid today, where the imam may follow a certain opinion, and some people who pray behind him may disagree with him as well. But they still stand behind him in prayer. And that's the way we should move forward. Especially us as a community, as minorities here, we should never get involved in these types of discussions, and these discussions should never lead to breaking the community apart. Right? And I guess one of the best things to always do is, whatever masjid we go to, and whoever the imam and scholar is there, we should do what? Respect him and follow his opinion, inshaAllah. Alright, so that's, I guess, one of the morals that's derived from this particular story. Right? Because both of them, they had a what? Ijtihadi disagreement. But at the end of the day, both of them were correct. But one of them, maybe it was more considerate to both individuals and both parties. So inshallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability, the tawfiq, to follow these guidance and follow these examples of the great scholars of the past. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us with a proper understanding of the Quran and a proper understanding of the religion. And most importantly, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to live our lives according to Islam, and inshallah to make us from amongst those who receive His mercy and forgiveness, and to make us from amongst the people of paradise, inshallah. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallah bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Any questions?
Like the story of Prophet Ibrahim, Allah says that we gave him rushd, the knowledge of right and wrong, hidayah. This is very important.
Yep. Hidayah is a big thing. That's why we ask for it more than 17 times every single day. Ihdina siratan mustaqim.
What you notice that when you look at the body of fiqh, that you see that the issues that really don't lend themselves to disagreements usually are the things, that the aspects that sort of make or break the Islamic civilization, that kind of define Islamic civilization. Whereas the ones that lend themselves to disagreement usually are not.
Yep. Usually speaking, the fundamentals are agreed upon.
And you'll find that the case with every civilization. Like here in this society, the issue of, let's say, abortion can go on forever. It's not like the issue of should we have a Bill of Rights or not. That's why when after 9/11, the Bill of Rights you see was slowly being dismantled, and it continues being dismantled. And along with that is a discussion of what's going to be left of American civilization
Afterwards.
after that.
Yeah.
So the point is that I noticed that among the Muslims, it seems like it's flipped upside down. See that the issues that have disagreements, it seems like we're treating them as issues that don't lend themselves to disagreements, vice versa.
Yeah.
Or at least we're not really emphasizing the issues that we should all agree on, to that extent.
Yeah.
So how to basically go from upside down to the right side up. If you have a step-by-step procedure to do that, mashallah, that would be great.
That'd be helpful.
I think that's kind of the crossroads where we're at. How do we, it's like we have this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kind of gave us the formula, which was practiced by the early generations, but it seems like it's been lost now, and that's maybe why we're in this mess.
Yeah. So they say a big part of it is education, right? A big part of it has to do with the Islamic education. So unfortunately, the system of Islamic education throughout the Muslim world is literally in shambles everywhere. So one of the ways to come back to that is, these grassroots efforts of establishing proper institutions of knowledge, where these things are being taught, where they're being propagated. Right? That's all of our responsibility. Right? That's everything that all of us have to take part in to ensure that our masajid have these institutions and these schools and I guess these after-school programs that teach these ideas, especially for, the masses, right? Especially. I mean, that's one aspect. I don't know what else.
There's a hadith about that there's our Muslims will be 72 groups, which is like they ask that which group is right, the majority. Like I see like most of the time in like live Makkah and Medina, like suppose like standing, majority of people they are standing like hands like this, and we should everything that is there we should like follow majority, which is mostly Hanafi, like in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, the Sunnis, that Iran, Turkey, like all southern Russia, even Syria, Lebanon, all these countries like are mostly are Hanafi, which is like Hanafi, and they are majority. Like
So the hadith you're referring to, it's not referring to issues of fiqh, right? The hadith is referring to issues of belief. It's referring to more to the aqidah aspect. So within the aqidah, for example, all of these schools of thought, they all fall under the banner of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah.
yeah.
So as long as you're falling under that banner of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, meaning your aqidah is correct, you're part of the safe group. Now, amongst that, it's perfectly fine to have these fiqh disagreements. It's perfectly fine. They're all valid. So even like with I mean, majority opinion sometimes plays an important role, but within these issues, that's not really a factor that's given consideration.
Like here, like we all the massages like pray northeast, and some groups are like southeast, southwest, which is they are breaking up from the majority, which is I believe that these are wrong because of that. Even if we are not right, but we are since we are majority. And breaking up from the majority is also a wrong thing to do.
That's a separate issue. That's another separate issue.
No, it is like they say that the majority is right. Always majority.
I mean, generally speaking, the majority will always be upon the haqq. Yadullahi ala. There's all these different ahadith that talk about like the majority of people always be upon the truth. But it doesn't necessarily refer to these 50 differences of opinion. Yeah. It's more on belief aspect. It's more referring to belief.
What is the difference of opinion between the meats? Like
between the meats?
Between the meats, like some groups will want to cut the throat, while the other ones just say Bismillah or you eat it, you know?
Alright, so that's another issue where there's ikhtilaf in it, but everyone agrees upon the principle that in order for meat to be permissible, it has to be slaughtered. Right? So in terms of slaughtering, the 3 or 4 major veins here have to be cut. So the jugular and the 2 ones to the side and like the esophagus, they should be cut. So everyone agrees upon that. So even in that debate, there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding. So the vast majority of scholars, even those who say that you can eat the meat of the Christians and the Jews, they even say that if it's not slaughtered, you can't eat it. And that's the actual issue. So the vast majority of meat products in America, especially the slaughterhouses, especially for cow and beef, the animal is not slaughtered. Right? The neck is not cut horizontally. It's a vertical cut. So the vertical cut, it's not a slaughter. So anything that's not slaughtered within Islamic law is considered to be mayta. It's impermissible. You can't eat it.
Even before the cut, they have to stun the animal.
They stun the animal. Sometimes the animal dies before that.
That's the
right. So in that issue especially, it's always better to err on the side of caution. Right? It's always better to err on the side of caution. And there's that famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He said that the halal is clear, the impermissible is clear. And in between the two there's gray area. And it's always better to do what? Avoid the gray area. Stay away from anything that's gray. Right? And on top of that, again, even the vast majority of scholars that say you can just say Bismillah and eat, they're talking if it was actually slaughtered by whom? Jews or Christians, and there was actual slaughter. If you let them know that it was a vertical cut, even they would say it's not permissible.
The Christian do slaughter too?
Yeah, so if meat is slaughtered according to their rulings and their guidelines, the Jewish guidelines, the Christian guidelines, even we say it's permissible. But the problem is that the most slaughterhouses, they don't actually slaughter it. They do this vertical cut. That's the main issue. right? And then the issue of
Kosher usually is slaughter.
yeah.
Because it's same as our way.
Yeah, especially the Glock kosher, like the hardcore Orthodox Jews. All right, and the issue again, it's a very important issue because it is a religious issue, right? This is something where Allah says, "Wala ta'kulu mimma lam yuzkar ismullahi alayh," that don't eat those things upon which the name of Allah hasn't been mentioned. The Prophet ﷺ told us, "La yadkhulul jannah jasadun ghudhiya bil haram," that body that is nourished by haram will not enter paradise. So it's a serious issue, so it should be taken seriously. And when something's serious, it's always better to err on the side of caution.
For slaughter, that is the subject we have to go out of. Like Muslims, mostly I see that we are very violently like slaughtering. Because I have seen people, they say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. The animal is not moving and putting his neck like that, and then it's proper time to slaughter it. But most of the people that I see that they just like put
Throw it down,
and slaughtering them, and I think that my opinion is not right to
It's not-
put their hand,
Yeah.
they say Allahu Akbar, take it like 4 or 5 minutes, they say Allahu Akbar until they take their head like this, and then you cut it by
You're not
some,
supposed to-
it's a properly.
You're not supposed to mistreat
You're not
animals.
supposed to show the blade to the animal and scare it, and stuff. It's supposed to be done in a very humane way. Unfortunately, that's been lost.
Yeah, but I have to that everybody like we say Allahu Akbar and very violently
Yeah.
killing the animal.
And
I have to
the funny thing is they're talking a lot now about organic, especially organic meat, and you'll find that organic meat is usually slaughtered, quote unquote, the Islamic way. That's the humane and safe, clean way
Of doing it.
to actually slaughter an animal. So when you hear these stories about how it's mistreated, it actually it's kind of like it kind of gives the whole Islamic aspect a bad name. So doing, it takes people in general away from the way things should be done.
The proper way.
Even just from a health perspective.
Alhamdulillah. Alright, so inshallah we will continue with the surah next week. Inshallah.